Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today, I must note that we are taping this episode on Thursday, August 7th. This is a mailbag episode. We're going to respond to your questions. I am only noting this so that if we get confused by talking about today, yesterday, and tomorrow on this episode, you'll know not to pay any attention to whatever. This is timeless and eternal. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Social commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John. I would just like to begin today's episode by congratulating our audience. I checked our YouTube subscriptions just this morning and found that we are at 19,000 subscriptions on YouTube. Remember, our goal is 20,000 by Labor Day, so we have a few more weeks here of summer before school starts everywhere and people end vacations until the end of the year and such. So I want to just urge everyone to keep it up. Keep asking people to like and subscribe our videos on the YouTube channel. They don't have to watch the videos; they just have to like and subscribe. Amazon delivery men. They come to your door, door dashers. They come to, part of the tip. Just say, hey, can you just go to YouTube, your YouTube app really quickly? And you take care of that. And that's just another way that we can boost our subscriptions to get to our goal by the end of the summer.
Thank you for that. And so we will begin today's mailbag episode with a question from Jonathan, no last name, just Jonathan, who makes a fascinating point. Why do we still use the word Zionist? He asks. The Zionist movement happened over a century ago, actually about 125, almost 130 years ago was the publication of Herzl's The Jewish State, and led to the formation of a country that now exists like any other country, schools, roads. I've always felt like the word Zionism belongs in history books, not in day-to-day conversation. I don't call myself a revolutionary anti-monarchist because I support America. Using the word Zionist always feels to me like we're acceding to the idea that Israel's very existence is in question, unlike any other country on earth. I always feel icky when I say it, kind of like how I feel when I use cis to describe normal people, thereby giving the trans movement undeserved import and power. Cis puts us normies on the back foot. Zionist serves the same function. The linguistic sophistry of our enemies has been one of the most maddening aspects of the turbocharged war on Jews of the last 2 years. I don't hate Jews, I just hate Zionists, etc. But we all know Zionist is just a way to say dirty Jew without social penalty. Quite the opposite, actually. So why do we still use the word? And is there a better word we can introduce? I'm literally 15 seconds. People in America call themselves Zionists as a shorthand to say that they are supporters of the state of Israel and sort of passionate supporters of the state of Israel because they believe in the mission of the state of Israel and its purpose as the homeland, the return from exile, and a refuge against the world's hatred and hostility to Jews, having had its expression over the previous 2,000 years since the expulsion from Jerusalem, and so it was shorthand in a world in which one could expect that people were more likely than not to be supporters, and among Jews, it was a way of making sure that Jews understood that Jews should support the state of Israel by supporting the Zionist mission, which was not ending. Remember, Israel's 80 years old, but like when I was a kid, it wasn't 80 years old. It was 30 years old. It was 25 years old. And it was much more unstable. Its possibilities of its ending its existence were not entirely irrational. Anyway.
Well, and I think that's kind of the key. I mean, the very good letter writer says that, using the term Zionist assumes that the state of Israel is in question, unlike every other state on earth. And the state of Israel is in question. There are powers in the world at work devoted to destroying the state of Israel, externally, but they're also advocates of binationalism, which would destroy the state of Israel as a Jewish state. And so I agree it's that Zionist has these roots, very particular roots, but you say you're a Zionist because you believe that Jews have a right to their national home, and you believe in the creation of that national home as a Jewish state. And I can't really think of a better term.
They're yeah, they're I mean, Zion is a place. I mean, it's the hill in Jerusalem. It's an actual physical place. And I think I always read, I mean, of course, I came from a Christian tradition. We always understood it to mean the historical home of the Jew, not just since the state of Israel was created, but this is their land. This is their place. That's what we were taught. And the word itself has that meaning, has a very different meaning in Christian. It can be used to mean heaven. It can be used to mean all kinds of other things in a Protestant tradition. But that's where I think to push back a little bit on the question, if there isn't an obvious alternative term, as Matt says, maybe the thing to do is to reclaim what Zionism means and continue to use it as it has been in the past, and to push back on anyone who has this double meaning, uses it as a cover for their own anti-Semitism. I mean, I've many times had that conversation and argument with people I know about whether calling yourself a Zionist versus, or I'm a Zionist, but kind of thing is even appropriate. Maybe it's to double down on the term itself, because it does have this deeply important historical meaning.
Yeah, it's a very complicated question because it is true that if we're still calling ourselves Zionists, there's a sort of, or if anyone's calling anyone a Zionist, there's this sort of supposition built in that Zionism hasn't achieved its goal yet. And then you could say, well, so as long as someone wants to destroy Israel, it will not have achieved its goal. That's not actually true. So I have a lot of sympathy for the question. I suppose you could say I'm a supporter of Israel, the way you say I'm a supporter of Ukraine. Or something like that. The only thing is that now I would never want to grant satisfaction to anti-Zionists by giving off the appearance of a retreat from the term. Now I would like to sort of stand on it more firmly in some sense.
Like neocon. That's what happened when
right.
People began calling the editors of commentary neoconservatives. They used it as an insult, but John's dad and Irving Kristol said, you know what? That's what we are.
Okay. Fine. Countries do cease to exist. They come into existence and cease to exist. Certainly, that's a story of the 20th century when countries that never existed before were incepted into existence, particularly after the First World War, when the European powers redrew the map of Europe and invented nations, shoved two peoples together and made Yugoslavia or Czechoslovakia or places that hadn't been countries before as we understand them. And a great many of the battles and wars of the 20th century have been fought on the basis of what happens when new countries have to actually come into existence and make their way. India and Pakistan being another, sort of notable example of a partition that happened that ended up not happening in the Middle East, where there was supposed to be a partition between the Arabs and the Jews, each of whom was supposed to get their own state. And the Jews said, great. And the Arabs said, no, we want everything, and then tried to destroy the Jewish state. So could an Israel disappear? Yes, and it's one of the reasons that Israel had to, stateless people who abhorred serving in militaries often because they were used as cannon fodder, sort of like in the Russian army, or were conscripted forever, had built exile societies based on powerlessness, so that alone among the peoples of the earth, like the people who, there was no ruler, there was no Jewish ruler, And the people who ended up kind of like ruling the roost in Jewish societies were the intellectuals, not the strongmen. We're not the people who could like beat other people in battle, but we're the people who knew the most and read the most and had the most to say about how to organize your life in this condition of statelessness. And then they come into this land in which they have to defend themselves. And as the great Kabbalistic scholar Gershom Scholem once said at my dinner table when I was a kid, and I'll never forget it, he was a friend of my parents, he said, the Jews are a talented people, and when they need to surface a talent, they surface the talent for martial power that no one would ever have expected that they would have. Why would the Arabs think that Israel could survive in 1948-49? Who were these people? They were kind of little terrorists. They blew up with some. They did this. They did that. They blew up some British installations, or we had skirmishes with them. But please, like, who the hell are they? And then they showed that they could stand and survive. There was a country Israel just took out, and America just took out its nuclear program. The purpose of that nuclear program was to destroy Israel and wipe it off the map, and that was not an unreasonable. It's an unreasonable ambition. It was not an unachievable ambition. If you really wanted to go all the way with it. So I'm not sure that what we could say is Israel is now eternal and will be here forever. Israel certainly can't conduct itself as though it believes that of itself. It has to believe that it is under existential threat in order to maintain the stance, the vigilance that it needs to protect itself, as the world is growing increasingly more hostile to it, by the way. I think in the long run, Israel's existence and strength will turn the tide so that this will no longer be a millennial ambition of people. But I think you're surrendering if you surrender the word Zionist. I mean, maybe we
great question though. It is a really great question.
It's a great. And by the way, the other problem is that Zionists aren't sure what Zionism means. I mean, because you do have in Israel people say, I'm part of the religious Zionists, or I'm part of I'm a labor Zionist, or
cultural Zionism.
Yeah, or hardly anybody is a labor Zionist anymore. But I'm a revisionist.
Revisionism.
The revisionist Zionism is 100 years old. That's how revisionist.
Isn't there like a neo-revisionism now?
I'm sure there's everything, because the idea is that defining what it means to live as a Jew in a Jewish state has many flavors. Like, you could say that it's how you could restore the temple and bring about the Jewish kingdom of ancient times, or that it's the one place on earth in which you can be a Jew and not even have to think about being a Jew, because you live in the one place on earth where Jews maintain and function as the largest majority in the population, and therefore you can go through your entire life not worrying that other people are looking at you and saying, who is that Jew on the block? That argument I was introduced to, oddly enough, in one of the novels by Harry Kemmelman, the Rabbi mystery novels. I think it was the Monday or Tuesday novel, which is set in Israel, and where Rabbi Small goes to Israel and says, I don't even have to be religious here anymore. I don't have to be a practicing religious person, because I don't need to separate myself from the rest of the population. Part of the purpose of Judaism is separateness, and maintaining separateness and continuity and peoplehood. And if I live here, don't really have to do that, because it's just a fact of life here. And that book was written in the late 60s. So it's a fascinating and unanswerable question, which is always a good question for us. Okay, let me move on to David Platt, a barrister in Britain, who writes, why do you think that someone like me, a non-Jewish Brit who has never been to the US, follows your podcast every day? What do you think are the elements that make your podcast so appealing?
He's a masochist. Oh, sorry.
Thank you so much for calling us appealing and successful. I personally felt a sense of belonging to commentary after COVID. and the introduction of the daily podcast is almost as if you became family as we went through the trauma of everything that happened during that mad period. It is perhaps also because each of you have interesting idiosyncrasies and quirky personality traits that interconnect and produce a much greater whole. This has nothing explicitly to do with Judaism, although I have learned much about it, and perhaps more to do with a shared conservative temperament. So thank you, David, for your kind words. And this is something I puzzle over every single day, and I honestly do, but I will. Why do you guys think people want to listen to us? It's an interesting question, because a lot of people come up to me and say,
Clearly, they find something they like
yeah,
in the product. But
well,
don't you think that's kind of particular to each audience member? I think the letter writers, I think David's note of a shared conservative sensibility is maybe what is the glue that binds us and our audience together. That you probably have, if not similar views, then kind of a similar framework or cultural bent that makes you interested in the podcast.
I think some of it's the temperamental aspect of it is important, because I don't think any of us are trying to proselytize our political views, our religious views, any views. We bicker in a way that I hope is intellectually satisfying for listeners, in the sense that we don't all agree on all points of fact. We have some principles that I think we all share, but a lot of the political podcasting world, I think, has become performative in a way that I don't think we're quite capable of. I mean, we all have lots of skills, but I don't think we could actually put on that kind of performance that many people enjoy consuming, because it just reaffirms what they already believe. So hopefully, I mean, what I hear from listeners is that, oh, wow, I was shocked to hear, Abe say he believes that, because I thought he might have assumed this. And so I think that we work things out in real time. We certainly did that during COVID. I mean, it was our daily Zoom sort of therapy session where we're all like, is the world going crazy? Am I crazy? What's happening here? And I feel like we try to do that with these political questions too. And to really, for me, it's also keeping it all deeply grounded in questions about what it means to be a human being and human nature, and how that plays out in the realm of politics in particular.
Yeah, I mean, what I hear from people is that they like the blend of personalities, and that we're different, and the looseness of it is almost creates like a eavesdropping effect. Like you're listening in on something that's just conversational and casual, and very clearly not scripted. And I think that's appealing. Yeah. I hope.
I mean, there is something to the fact that we're not scripted. And when I say we're not scripted, I mean, we are really not scripted. You would be astonished, and people who do this as we do are often astonished to hear that we get on this Zoom about 30 seconds or sometimes a minute before we start. And we're like, well, here are the three things maybe we should talk about. And sometimes we don't get to them. And sometimes as I start speaking, my brain goes somewhere else and I start bringing up something else.
Sometimes we spend an hour on Howard Stern.
Exactly. Which people were, by the way, so that happened earlier this week, where we did a show on Howard Stern, and some people were pretty disgusted with us, I have to say. I got some emails, particularly people disappointed, I have to say, in my good friend Abe Greenwald, a person of high sensibility and humor and honor. Saying anything nice about somebody is disgusting, as Howard Stern said several people who wrote us emails. And I've
too bad.
And yet they always want Abe to speak more.
Yeah,
everyone wants Abe to speak.
Finally, he did. He was the words poured forth for the first time in the 2 years I've been on this podcast. And look at how he's treated.
I mean, you were talking about highness, were you? I mean, it's Howard Stern.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were talking about Stern as a cultural figure. It wasn't like a fan. It wasn't like a sort of like, we were doing the.
I am not backing off.
No, I
was a huge
he's
fan.
going to dig deeper now.
Yeah.
I was a huge fan.
Never back off.
Yeah.
And
he stinks now, but he was
we
great.
were young, like we were young people. And yes, we enjoy when you're close to being a sophomore, it's okay to enjoy sophomoric humor. That's why it's called, he is the king of sophomoric humor. No one has ever made more hay off sophomoric humor than Howard Stern. But it is interesting that we are going through that kind of skepticism about our
idiosyncratic.
Yes. So, what else do we have here that I can bring up?
Lots of letters.
No, got a lot of letters, and I'm looking for a good one. Here's one that I think is an interesting. Okay, so this is a tough one for us. Ryan Lieb, the commentary podcast speakers are fervent advocates for Jewish students and exhibit similar enthusiasm for drastic cuts to scientific and biomedical funding as a financial penalty levied on research universities. While anti-Semitic protests and research may coincide at the same school, the two activities are both practically and morally distinct. Further, federally funded university research has fueled our technology sector for decades, and those researchers graduate prepared to fill the org charts of the most dynamic companies driving our economy. Two questions then. Is it just to collaterally punish researchers for being adjacent to protesters? And even if you find it morally justified, is it wise, given the economic toll these massive cuts to early stage research will have on the most productive sectors of the American economy versus other possible means of punishment? Christine.
Well, what other possible means of punishment? These research facilities on many of these universities are cash cows. I mean, they are what the universities built infrastructure for, spend a lot of money on. And when you have administrators and university presidents who refuse to enforce civil rights law on their campuses and allow for year over year, this isn't recent, year over year, basically disobeying federal law, civil rights law, and obviously not stopping the anti-Semitism of late, then that is the one stick. That's the one thing that will actually cause them to feel some pain. So are innocent researchers who are not anti-Semites going to be harmed? Yes, but you know what? Our entire higher education system is harmed by allowing that to flourish on any college campus. So it sounds like a very blunt instrument, and there obviously are going to be downstream effects for researchers. But the people they should be angry with aren't the ones enforcing the law. It's the administrators and leaders of their campuses who allow this terrible behavior to flourish and have allowed it. So in that sense, I feel like you can't really separate what they're doing. I also, by the way, haven't seen a lot of those researchers going out and counter-protesting against the, pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas student group. So if you really believe that, you want to defend the university's payments to your particular kind of research, then maybe defend the students who are being driven off of campus because of anti-Semitism, or maybe stand up in a hiring committee and say, you know what, I don't think these DEI policies are constitutional. So there's a kind of late to the fight here tone to that letter, that although I am sympathetic to people losing funding for important scientific research, the problem isn't what's going on now. It's what's been happening for decades on campuses.
I'm snapping my fingers along with Christine.
I get that.
I will just quickly say that one of the things that I learned, not really as a result of Doge, but maybe kind of as a result of Doge, just in general, as that first 6 weeks were unfolding of the Trump administration and its decision to break with precedent and custom and ritual and say that, all bets are off and everything is open to examination, was the uncovering of the fact that research universities are scamming the American taxpayer. That the amount, and I speak again, and I've said this before, so Mr. Lieb can understand this, the amount of money that goes to support the coffers of the university rather than the research vastly outweighs the amount of money that goes to the research. That in the formulation that I've heard, you buy the same light bulb 80 times. So universities understandably take a certain amount of the money from research grants to support keeping the lights on, right? Keeping the electricity going in the lab, janitors who have to clean the building, all of that stuff, the administrative costs of running an expensive research facility. But there are hundreds of grants that go to X research university. And every one of those grants has something between 50 and 80% of its money taken off the top by the university for administrative costs, which means that, again, every light bulb might be purchased 80 times. And that's wrong. This is not something that is something that they get through the cover of saying we are doing important research. That is not something that anybody should be paying for. And it happens to dovetail with the fact that these institutions, feeling themselves impregnable from public opinion, from being held to a realistic financial standard by the grant givers, none of whom have any sense of the importance of their stewardship of this public trust of tax dollars. They don't care. The people who give the grants don't care. The people who receive the grants don't care. The universities don't. Nobody cares about the taxpayer. It's okay for them to rip off the taxpayer. I don't think it's okay because they have looks at Veritas on their logo from 1622. That is of no meaning or moment to me. And I also happen to know, just to finish up here with a bow, that yes, very important biomedical research goes on. There's also a lot of crap research, huge amounts of crap research that goes on, that are given money and get grant money, either tax-free, nonprofit money, or directly from the taxpayer. And you shouldn't just assume that that money is being given in good faith, that it is being spent on projects that aren't injurious to the American experiment and to American society, because a lot of it is. And ultimately, though, it gets back to what Christine says, which is these schools have systematically meant, the ones that are really being punished here, by the way, have systematically been violating the civil rights of students and employees who are of a specific minority that, yes, we have a particular connection to, and certainly I have a connection to.
If you take federal money, you have to follow federal law. And that progressives spent 90 years building up this system, and that system became corrupted. And since October 7th, it has become hostile to Jewish students in particular. So there's every justification, in my view, for the Trump administration to say, if you're going to follow federal law, then you get your money. And by the way, this has produced results because we have the deal with the University of Pennsylvania. We have the deal with Columbia University. We're probably going to get a deal with Harvard. If you have leverage, you should use it. And I think that in this case, the Trump administration is using its leverage for the good.
Okay, so I think I got one more. Here's something. As a disaffected Democrat who is moving to the right, Jeff Muffson asks, I was wondering if you could make some suggestions for books to serve as a primer on conservative thought or policy. I ordered The Twilight Struggle per Matthew Condi's recommendation, and I'm excited to dive into the 900-page tome. That
just read the beginning and the end. You don't have to, unless you're really interested. It's a long one.
Yeah, that is a book about U.S. policy toward Nicaragua by Robert Kagan. Anyway, but a primer in conservative thought, and there are many sort of obvious choices. there's
Well, Matt's book is a good start.
Well,
He
Matt's
could read
book is
about
the
the history of
history.
the right.
Yeah.
Well,
So
that's not what I was going to recommend,
Right, yeah.
especially for someone who has been a Democrat for much of their life and is becoming disillusioned with the social, cultural, economic, and foreign policies of the Democratic Party and the progressive movement. I would recommend Things That Matter by Charles Krauthammer, because Charles Krauthammer himself was someone who was part of the left for many years. On foreign policy, he began to be disillusioned by the Democrats in the early 1980s. And then on domestic policy, he really began disillusionment during the 1990s. But he's also the best, I think, arguer, if that's a word. I'm making it up.
Yeah.
For someone who comes from a left standpoint, people who are familiar with the career of Charles Krauthammer and his writings and speeches, they know that what was interesting about Krauthammer was, even if you were opposed to him, you still had to reckon with him. You still considered his arguments serious. And so that, I think, is a great gateway for people who are kind of on a journey to the right.
I would go in a slightly more impressionistic direction and suggest the book that I think more than any other from people that I know of an intellectual bent have found descriptive in what changed them. And that is Witness by Whittaker Chambers. Whittaker Chambers, who became famous in the late 1940s. He was an editor at Time magazine who went to the House in America, or the Senate actually, and said that
it was the House.
A leading figure in the Democratic foreign policy establishment, Alger Hiss, had, like him, been a Soviet agent in Washington in the 1930s. And Hiss sued him for libel. In the course of, and Hiss was an agent. We now know, with unmistakably, he appears in the Venona papers as Ailes. ALES was his name. He was the person who set up the American side of the Yalta Conference that helped divide up Europe after World War II. So Stalin had an agent on the inside setting up the conference that changed the face of the world. But this book is a memoir, and it is a memoir of what it is that drove somebody like Chambers to become a communist, and what happened to disillusion him about communism. It is one of the most beautifully written American books. Nobody really knew that Chambers had this in him when he published it in 1952. It was an enormous bestseller. But the people who've kept it alive in the 80 years since its publication, or 70 years since its publication, are young people who come to it and discover this personal account of what it was to learn that you were part of the civilization that you were part of, that there was some perverse incentive or drive in the West to want to take down the world that you had grown up in, where that come from, what the impulse was, and then what ordinary things in life. And of course, in Chambers's case, it's this remarkable passage describing his discovery of his infant daughter's ear, where he looked at his infant daughter's ear and said, this cannot have happened by accident. This thing that is sticking out of her head that makes it possible for her to hear, that has this strange shape, that this was not an accident. And that moment is what took him down this road. He did become a religious Christian conservative. He's a very complicated person. It is one of the great American books, and it is a foundational work of what it is to be a person with a non-progressive sensibility after having had one.
And can we add, because it came out around the same time and still gets much debated among conservatives, Richard Weaver's Ideas Have Consequences, which is another sort of attempt at a philosophical 30,000 foot level to say what's happening to Western civilization. And it was one of the earliest and most profound critiques of moral relativism. But the reason it's so interesting and worth reading still is that it continues to provoke arguments among conservatives about what was he right, which strains have, of his predictions have proven true and which have not. So it's also, for someone who's sort of coming to conservative ideas, it's maybe I would say if you read those two in conjunction, you're getting a really interesting glimpse of sort of mid 20th century origin stories of conservatism.
And I would add, in light of everything that's been exposed about the universities now, Closing of the American Mind by Alan Bloom, from 1987. And Bloom captures, things have gone so far past what he was talking about, but this was the sort of inception of what we're seeing today on campus, and he lays it all out fantastically. It gets quite abstruse as it goes on, but hang in for as long as you can. It's very worthwhile.
I love the abstruse stuff.
So do I.
Closing the American Mind, actually, because there is a kind of generalized critique of young people in colleges that is the thing that juiced it and goosed it. And he is describing the people who have now a lot of them who have come along to make things much worse in America after having gotten elite educations that he is describing. But his history of how ideas ended filtering down to college campuses through the 20th century that ended up creating this toxic, Philistine, anti-intellectual, barbaric stew is very compelling.
And it's a great way to read an intelligible and accessible version of the philosophy of Leo Strauss.
Right.
That's what I found in that middle. But he's essentially channeling everything he learned from his teacher, Leo Strauss.
Yeah.
But he is more direct, let us say, than Strauss ever is.
Yes. Okay, so there are so many others, but we're out of time. We'll keep doing these when we can. Thank you to everybody who wrote in. There were a lot of great questions, and we're just too. Someone just wrote in and said we should have a lightning round, like at the end of the McLaughlin group, at the end of every show, which I think is actually sort of like the polar opposite of what we are, which is discursive and rambling and unorganized, disorganized. That I don't think we could really work that out. I don't have a prediction. I have friends. You probably have this, Matt, too. Every now and then, people you go on. I don't really watch it much anymore. But the Brett Baer show would have be like you're supposed to come bring a prediction, and then you would get this panicked call from. Does anybody have a prediction? I need a prediction, like something. What's going to happen?
Well, that comes from the McLaughlin group.
That's the McLaughlin group.
But then all those predictions were fed to the panelists on the McLaughlin group. Fred Barnes or Pat Buchanan or Novak or Eleanor Cliff, they all their sources, whether that was Democrats in Cliff's case or Republicans in Fred's and Buchanan's case, would tell them on Thursday, hey, say
here's
this.
Prediction. Yeah, right. Yeah.
So for us to have predictions means we'd
uncorruptible.
have to do more work. We'd have to actually do more reporting. And I just can't. I don't know if I can shoulder that burden.
Yeah. Also, people forget what you predicted, and now no one forgets anything, and everything you ever say is recorded and can be thrown back in your face. So I predict nothing.
Yeah, don't you have to sing if we reach 20,000
nothing.
subscribers or something? Didn't you promise a song?
I did promise I would sing a song. I don't know what we could bring that up. Okay, if we reach 20,000 subscribers,
aren't we making the new T-shirt? We're
going to make a new T-shirt.
Yes.
I did say I would sing a song. If you want to write to podcast@commentary.org and ask what song it is that I should sing, or suggest a song that I should sing.
This could get
from
very
the Great American
unfriendly
Songbook.
quickly.
From the Great American Songbook. I'm not going to do Rapper's Delight. That you can watch the old lady and the wedding singer who does.
No, Since You've Been Gone.
Yeah, I'm not doing sensibility. I'm not doing milkshake. I'm not doing driver's license. I'm
Milkshake.
doing
Wow,
nothing
that's
for Taylor. I'm not
that's
doing
a
Taylor
Oh,
mess.
Swift.
this is turning into a commentary after dark.
Yes, it is. Okay. So thanks very much. We will be back in due course. For Matt, Abe, and Christine, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.